Absolutely. So welcome, everyone. I think that in the last session, JP nicely gave a little bit of background to these breakouts that we are definitely underrepresented as an LHS Plus community in a lot of academic medicine leadership, especially within some of these medical school leadership positions, such as Dean for Medical Education. So we are truly pleased to have Dr. John Davis here today, who's a professor of medicine, associate dean for curriculum, and as if you were not busy enough, also interim associate dean for students while at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Davis has done his training in a bi-coastal way. He graduated from Harvard University and got his PhD at Boston College, finished his medical school at Yale, and then we trained very close to each other. Dr. Davis was at the Mass General for Internal Medicine and Mass General Brigham Combined Infectious Disease Fellowship before returning back to UCSF, where he is now. So Dr. Davis is here to tell us a little bit about his path and what it means to be a Dean of Medical Education. So Dr. Davis, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Saldana. So, as I was mentioning to those of us who were on before, despite the bow tie that I wear here, I do like to keep it a little bit informal. So please do populate the chat with questions, et cetera, and we'll have some opportunities for people to interact here. My goal is I know we only have about an hour together, so to save plenty of time for some questions and conversation that we can have hopefully at the end. So let me see if I can share this and do this properly. We'll try here, and then I will see if I can make that in presentation mode. So we'll do this better. Okay. So, so as you heard Dr. Saldana mention, so my name is John Davis. I'm at UCSF and primarily wear the Associate Dean for Curriculum hat. With the departure of Lee Jones, I am the Interim Associate Dean for Students. There's an important, I think, part about this to mention sort of toward the end as part of this. I think it's really important that we share a little bit about ourselves, especially when we're speakers, because I think it helps the audience to understand some of our context and sort of basically the baggage, the lenses that we use, that we bring to conversations and understanding things. So in that spirit, sharing a little bit about myself as well. So this is a picture of what was primarily my nuclear family as I was growing up. For a variety of reasons, my father was not present. And so I was primarily me, my mother, my grandfather. I think speaking to what we talked about in the previous session about some of the double imposter syndrome. So while my name is John Davis, it is actually John Rodriguez Davis, or I guess Davis Rodriguez if you're doing it the Spanish way. In any case, and so I was brought up primarily on my mother's side of the family. My grandfather came to Texas as a child, and my mother was born in Houston, and so was I. As part of that, I share a lot of identities with people who were born in Texas. I'm Tejano. I likewise had my father's family who was involved, and they were rural East Texas white Protestants. So I have a little bit of that in my background as well. As you heard Dr. Saldana mention, I left Texas to go to Harvard, and I was fortunate to be there for undergraduate. I will say that was where I started with my interest really in earnest about teaching. I was a chemistry major there and very much enjoyed teaching about chemistry. So much so that I actually went to Boston College. I actually got a PhD in bioinorganic chemistry, just to be extra nerdy. And while I was there doing my PhD, every semester taught. And so really it cemented the idea that I did like education, but it also taught me that despite the involvement with sort of associated to medicine type things like biochemistry, et cetera, and I was familiar with drug development and things of that nature, I really wanted to be part of patient care. So I then went to medical school at Yale. So I kind of did the MD PhD the long unpaid for way. And while I was at Yale for medical school, started my interest in medical education, specifically then initially as a participant in a couple of medical education studies, and then toward the end, being able to contribute some, setting up peer tutoring resources and things of that nature, mostly focused around step one. As Dr. Salanya mentioned, I went back to Boston and was there for internal medicine training and then infectious disease training at Mass General and at the Brigham. I also did an HIV fellowship year, and then I did a transplant ID fellowship year, at which point they basically said, we have no more fellowship years for you to do. You may now find a job. And so I said, that's great. So my first formal faculty position was at Ohio State, at the Ohio State University. And so that was where I then started my journey into education leadership. So while I was there, basically taught to anyone who stayed still long enough. So I was, taught residents, taught medical students, taught fellows, taught nurses, taught nurse practitioners, a lot of different teaching opportunities, which was great. Eventually got involved in tutoring for step one and setting up a tutoring process. Again, this builds off of what I had done a little bit when I was at Yale for medical school. And because of my background, again, I had a PhD in bioinorganic chemistry and I understood drug development. And so I wasn't scared by pharmacology or biochemistry and that thing. So I was able to help tutor. And then based on that, when an opportunity became available for an opening as an assistant dean for students at Ohio State, I applied and got that. And then afterwards, when our vice dean for education left Ohio State, our associate dean for curriculum or medical education became the vice dean. And so that was an opening of a position there. And likewise, I applied for that and was fortunate enough to get that as well. And so had a wonderful time with that, and had basically sort of found my niche there, and enjoyed it enough that when the position opened at UCSF, I sort of said, this is what a fantastic opportunity to come and do even more of this. And so, yes, as was mentioned, I finally sort of migrated my way west to California, and here I am. Throughout this journey, important to know that, again, I think this was brought up also in the last session, again, owning the fact that I'm a relatively light-skinned LHS plus identified person with last name Davis. Again, this understanding some of how this was constructed, where this came from, yes, in part, this is part of what my family did. This is part of what my grandfather insisted on, that you're going to speak English and speak English perfectly. And this is exactly how you're going to succeed. You're going to do well in education. And that is what we value more than anything. There are a lot of things that sort of entailed, but it meant that part of my hidden identity was, in fact, was part of my Mexican-American heritage. And then likewise, I knew from a relatively early age that I was gay. And so that was something that I had a chance to explore finally when I got out of Texas. And in many instances, or in many situations, both of these end up being relatively hidden identities that I have to kind of out myself about. And it means that, again, when we go through and walk through some of these spaces, what we choose to say and disclose about ourselves, I think is very important in how people view us and that kind of thing. So with that in mind, moving on a little bit to this, why this session, what is this here about? And you heard some framing from JP earlier. From my perspective, there are a few reasons here. So first, nobody tells us about this job. Again, this is a job that exists. An associate dean for curriculum or medical education. It's called several different things. You have to have one in a medical school. Like a curriculum doesn't just sort of run itself. And so, it's there. Everyone had one, but rarely do people know, like, what exactly do you do? Like, what do you do? Also, importantly, nobody tells us about this job. So as I've walked through spaces before, again, I've been a dean for students. I'm a dean for students now in the interim sense. I have been I've been involved in the AAMC and the group on diversity and inclusion and others. If I look at different roles in the dean suites or the decanal roles, I see that there that faces of diversity are there in sort of different amounts. And I will say, of all the roles that I've had, a curriculum dean role is probably one of the least diverse roles nationally speaking. So if I walk into GDI, boy, it's a great. Again, we were talking about the caldo earlier. That it's like it's there. You walk into GEA, which is the Education Association. It's pretty white. And so what that means is that we're not reflected there. And it also means people don't think of us when they think of that kind of role. Likewise, pathways in medical education in general are just not clear. Again, the concept of a clinician educator pathway is still a relatively new construct. And so it's something that people are still kind of navigating their way through. And layer on top of that every institution, again, I said before, it can be called different things. It also means that every institution looks at it a little bit differently. And so the pathways to get to one of those positions is not always clear. And because of that, it means there are inconsistent preparation opportunities. Is there an assistant dean role in your institution? Maybe, maybe not. And at UCSF, there are not assistant deans. So we have directors of different parts of the curriculum. So how are you supposed to prepare yourself to become an associate dean for something like curriculum or medical education? So my goal here today is to hopefully give people at least an approach to each of these. And I know that, again, the audience is diverse here, meaning there are people who have dean roles or who may be able to, hopefully then use something like this in mentorship with others. And I would love to hear what approaches people are doing here. Question about hopefully for Donald, are we able to do pairing in Zoom? Is that possible? Yes, no?
Pairing as in just one-on-one matches?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure this room is configured for it, unfortunately.
Okay, that's all right. I just wanted to check and see. Normally, again, you'll see my curriculum nerd showing through here. I would normally like to do the think, pair, share thing and sort of have us do this in any case. So, but I also, Myers-Briggs ENTP, for whatever that's worth, we roll with things. We'll just do what we have access to here. So what I would like to have asked you to do is pair with each other. But in the interim, what we'll do is just have everyone reflect personally about one or two things that either you've done, or perhaps if you've advised others, that you advised others do to think about sort of being helpful as activities on the path to becoming an associate dean for medical education, and in particular, being cognizant of what your context is. So one of the things that we do in sort of pairing here is thinking about hearing about the context of another school, how things are different. Do you have assistant deans? Do you have this? Do you have other programs that are meant to facilitate development or things of that nature? So we'll save this maybe for discussion at the end then, and bank that time for that.
Or maybe Donald, so there's our breakout groups aren't enabled, or they are enabled?
I was just going to mention that I am able to make, there are 12 participants here. I can make 6 breakout rooms and manually and automatically assign if you'd like that.
Perfect.
That would be perfect. And if we could set the time for 3 minutes. So you have a minute and a half each. It's going to be, that's it. But so yeah, 3 minutes would be terrific.
Great. We'll set that up now.
All right. So I hope people had a good time chatting there a little bit. What I'd like to take us to now is my framework for thinking about it. And again, there are many, many frameworks out there for considering what the roles of are in medical education. Some are meant to be used, I think, primarily for advancement and promotion and things of that nature. I think about this framework being used mostly to describe the role, and sort of when I think about balancing some of the different activities that I'm doing, making sure that I'm considering what those are in a curriculum dean or a medical educate UME dean role. So again, the dean roles are about being sort of at the 30,000 foot level. And so taking some of what I call the macro view. So the M stands for maintenance, or also importantly, management. Again, so when we think about it, curricula don't run themselves. So when you think about it, there are usually staff involved with the curriculum, and that's great, but there are faculty as well. And the faculty are the ones who are running parts of a course and that kind of thing, and they need help, they need support. They often need management. And so the maintenance part is a lot of what I do in a given week, a given month, et cetera. And so there's a lot of that. The second part, the A, is advancement. And what I mean by that is specifically innovation. How are we doing things that are new and different and exciting with a curriculum? We don't want to have a curriculum stagnant. And so we're always thinking about doing something new. And so that's an important part of things. Another important part is the C, compliance. And by this, I specifically mean the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, or the LCME. For those who've been in an academic medical center for a while, you've probably seen some of these come and go. For those who are newer to a medical center, you may not have seen this, but these are very important visits. That's how we maintain accreditation. And as a curriculum dean, many, not all, but many of the standards and elements that you have to deal with your curriculum. And they deal with assessment, they deal with the curriculum, et cetera. So you're kind of in the thick of it. The R is for research. Again, this is supposed to be a scholarly enterprise. And so every academic medical center should be contributing to knowledge. So this goes hand in hand with advancement. Again, it's great that we're doing new things, that we're trying new things out, but we should be taking a scholarly approach to all of that. And so from a research standpoint, being able to say, did it work, and sort of critically evaluating the innovations that we do. And then last is optimization. And this really kind of gets to sort of continuous quality improvement within a curriculum. So we're not always doing research about novel things, et cetera, and trying to disseminate those into the literature. But we have to gather data and analyze it to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and that we're getting the outcomes that we're supposed to be getting, or the ones that we want. And the optimization part is a way of continuously looking at that data to ensure that that's actually happening. So in that framework of thinking about the different things that are happening, one of the important parts of this is that LHS Plus work fits within this. And it's true for all identities. So as an example, one might be thinking about, let's say if you have an area of passion within, maybe it's within compliance. So looking at, there are certain elements and standards and elements that relate to aspects of diversity. And so maybe part of what you're interested in doing is looking at exactly drilling down on how are we doing with respect to LHS Plus identities in some of these diversity related elements and standards. Perhaps you're interested instead in up here in the maintenance and management phase. Maybe we're interested in what is the experience of our LHS Plus identified educators. What is the journey that they are making through medical education? How are we looking after them? What is the development that they might need? Maybe we're interested in again, we can go through all this, but the idea is to say that looking for areas of overlap between the identities that you carry and are passionate about and expressing within medical education is important because they can be applied to any and all of these. And then because I'm a professor, my job is to profess, and so I will. And so some random advice about these things. And it's interesting, this came up in our breakout session that we had just a few minutes ago here. I do feel that there are certain competencies, I guess I'll say, that we have to develop as medical educators. And these are probably as general as just as faculty going through our journey in academic medicine. The first is addressing saying yes. So as junior faculty, we often say yes, and I was guilty, of course, of the same thing. I think there is something appropriate to that about saying yes to everything, mostly because I think as residents, fellows, it can be tough to know what the landscape is like. And so it can be really challenging to know exactly what you want to do. You may have an area of interest and areas of passion, which are terrific, but how to express those as a faculty member and what venue is right for that can be challenging to know. And so that's where saying yes can be helpful. And especially in medical education, we aren't given many opportunities to get out there and teach, let alone have education leadership roles. So being able to say yes a lot, I think, is an important thing. Rapidly followed by being able to say no. And so at some point, you have to decide what you're interested in and how to narrow and focus. And so this is sort of relatively standard, I think, advice that people get is at some point, then you have to start saying no to certain things. I think the third stage, though, is to me, one of the important ones, which is now how do we say yes and, meaning at some point, you've now gone from I can focus on things to being able to critically evaluate opportunities that come to you, to be able to say, okay, well, here's how I can leverage this for further development for me. So here is where overlaying something like some kind of framework, again, we could use the macro framework we talked about earlier here as an example. Let's say if you are already involved with teaching in a course and you're given an opportunity to direct the course or co-direct or assistant direct a particular course, being able to say, okay, does this comport with where I want to go? Is this what I'm interested in? Great. So that means I'm sort of on the yes and I've made it through the no part. So now what are the things that I need, A, to make this successful, and B, that will help me in my next step? So for instance, if let's say using the macro framework, if your area of maybe development would be in that management role, or something of that nature, then maybe you can say, I love this. This is a great opportunity. And I would like to be able to pair that with some kind of faculty development around management or around leadership development, et cetera. And those are ways of being able to then not only take on things and craft a portfolio of activities that you've done that speak to a particular direction, but also to get the development you need to be able to do that well. And then lastly, I mentioned saying goodbye, and I don't mean that as being actually leaving. You'll see that I obviously changed institutions a fair amount going through, and I can say that I see what the pluses and minuses are of something like that. But what I really mean by that is the ability to say goodbye. And so what that means is really looking at other opportunities that are out there, not being overly beholden to one role, to one position, to one institution. Being able to look at what else is out there can be helpful. And especially there are times in medical education, especially senior medical education leadership, where pathways may be closed for a while. If someone is in a role and not interested in leaving, then that role may not open up for a while. And so if that's the case, then being able to look at other institutions can be helpful. And it allows one to acquire skill sets, perhaps, that you wouldn't in other ways. Personally, I can say my time that I spent at Ohio State was really good because I was able to get some of those experiences in a time frame that I would not have if I'd stayed at my institution before then. So again, I think those are just sort of some random pieces of advice that I would throw out there. So one last pairing again, which is, so putting some of those things together. Can you think of, one or two concrete next steps that you would take in your institution to move along that path toward medical education leadership? Again, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily, but if you feel comfortable, feel free to trade contact information with your Zoom partner, and that can maybe even help with not only accountability, but I will say also with networking, which is an important aspect of some of this too. So Donald, could you work your magic and return us to our pairings?
Sure. Would you like the pairings to be the same?
If we could, that would be phenomenal.
Great. Rooms should all be back.
All right. Welcome back again. Okay. I think with that in mind, I will say now it's open mic time for sharing any thoughts that you've had, insights, other things that you've garnered over time that would help others here, other comments, and of course, any questions. I leave my contact information here in case I can be of any help. I'm john.davis2@ucsf.edu. And of course, always I'm thankful for your time. I will stop sharing now so we can hopefully see each other. Yes.
Super. Well, John, thanks for a great talk. And I think in our eyes, you're John Davis #1. So whoever that is,
Thank you.
All right. So as moderator, John, maybe I'm going to ask you a clarifying question. So I heard you say two things as far as job description. So I heard Dean of Curriculum, and then I also heard Dean of Undergraduate Medical Education. And could you make a distinction? I know that at some institutions, there's purview over admissions and student affairs, and it's kind of this Uber UME Dean versus curriculum. Could you kind of distinguish that, maybe talk a little bit more about what your role is at UCSF?
Absolutely. And so I think it's important to, maybe I'll flesh this out a bit more. As I was mentioning before, that every institution is a little bit different. Once upon a time, there often was one associate dean. Again, this is going back quite a fair ways, but there was one. It is rare now to find any institution that has that. At UCSF, we normally have a complement of an associate dean for students, an associate dean for curriculum, and we are unique, I think, relatively, in having an associate dean for assessment. So Karen Hauer is our associate dean for assessment. In many instances, at most institutions, there's kind of one associate dean over curriculum and assessment. So in my title, I'm an associate dean for curriculum. That's because we also have an associate dean for assessment. When I was at Ohio State, I was the associate dean for medical education, which is, again, a title that often leaves in parentheses, but unsaid, undergraduate medical education. So again, usually an associate dean for medical education is taken as meaning for UME, but often we have to ask. We just sort of say, and at your institution, what does that mean? And so, yes, you're right. So sometimes admissions may be under student affairs. Sometimes it's not. We have a separate associate dean for admissions, along with an associate dean for student affairs or for students. So again, every institution is a little bit different, and often the FTE, the amount that each role gets paid, is a little bit different as well. So at the UCSF context, we have those associate deans. We also have, it's, I think, also relatively rare. I think there are maybe 3 or maybe 5 institutions, I think, that have this, an associate dean for staff. And interestingly, at UCSF, that staff role is called the associate dean for medical education, because that person oversees the Office of Medical Education and the medical education staff. And so we have that as well. And then we have an associate dean for GME, and someone overseeing CME as well. So we have a lot of associate deans. We do not have assistant deans at UCSF, whereas many other institutions will. And I think, but again, so there's a wide array there of those.
Great, thanks, John. Dr. Nino, we have your hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Saldana, and thank you, Dr. Davis, for sharing your experiences. I was wondering if you can share with us some of the challenges that you have faced to become the associate dean, and now that you are the associate dean, what kind of roadblocks have you had to face, and have you managed to work your way?
I think so. Thank you for that question. I love being able to share a little bit about obviously my journey. I will say that, and I'll own this up front, which is I think I probably was taught from a very early age sort of not to acknowledge roadblocks. I think I heard some of this in the session that we had earlier about people just sort of, you put the blinders on, you're very dogged about what you're doing, you're just going to keep going, and people, may try to, again, you pull data, you do whatever you do, you're in it to win it, right? So what roadblocks have I faced? I think several. Questions about qualifications for sure. So I will say my pathway to being an associate dean for medical education or curriculum, I went through and was an assistant dean for students and then became an associate dean for curriculum. So I went more from a leadership standpoint than, let's say, others who may have been, a clerkship director or a course director who then became in charge of several courses and then became an associate dean for curriculum kind of thing. So I think I faced questions about that. There were questions, I think, about, it's really fascinating when people saw my PhD background. I think there were people who were wondering if I was going to be taking things away from clinical time or taking things away from aspects around, like, let's say, social justice. And then when people saw some of my own publications and my own background, where I publish a lot around sexual and gender minority health and some around intersectionality and that kind of thing, they're now worried that I'm going to do away with basic sciences or whatever. So people, I think, tend to project a lot onto leadership. And so the many of the roadblocks that I've faced have been from what people project onto me based on, what they've either are perceiving as my values, et cetera, without necessarily asking me. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. The way I've addressed those is by having meetings with people. And so if we have a chance to connect and really talk about things, I think it allows to build some of those relationships, and usually that helps. Now that I am an associate dean, I think it's wonderful. I'm part of a really nice leadership team, and I'm able to focus on, I think, on all the different ways that we want to move a curriculum forward. And so I'm very much enjoying a lot of that. Now, the challenges, I'll just say, of course, COVID, having changed an entire curriculum several times over in the past year has been, well, that's been an experience. I'll just say that. So anyway, but thank you for the question. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. I appreciate you sharing with us.
Thanks, John. Dr. Cavazos.
Let me share with you, I'm an assistant dean. I have been an assistant dean for 9 years for MD PhD program. So I do every single thing in the dean's office in my office because I do admissions, recruiting, curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that I want to share with you guys is I just served in a UME search committee. And so, we were interviewing, we did a national search and interviewed different people for this particular position. In our structure, we have an office that has admissions and curriculum. There are several EDDs with PhDs that do assessment, but they are under curriculum. And then you have student affairs. Student affairs, when you're dealing with a mega school, we have 220 students per class. It's a full-time job, period. Those people do 5%, 10% clinical. I was at 3 a.m. doing a psychiatric assessment or helping a psychiatric assessment or getting a student to help somebody this past Thursday. So, I mean, these are things that happen, for student affairs, very different than curriculum. But the thing what you were looking is experience. So clerkship director, serving in the curriculum committee. Those are the kinds of experiences that are the checkbox. The other aspect is having served as part of the self-study of LCME is another check. So if you have the opportunity, if this is the area of interest that you want to be, these are the kinds of experiences that will give you a leg up in terms of making yourself kind of credible to become and lead as an education dean in an office. And clearly, curriculum dean or education dean, will require leadership experiences and, certainly make sure that you add coaching if you have the ability to lever things, resources. And lastly, FTE. This is a very important thing. If you don't have the resources, the time, you're going to do a poor job. And so, I mean, generally speaking, they wanted you to succeed. And that's why they are putting search committees and et cetera, but you need to have a honest assessment of how the office works and what are the shortcomings. And so get all the LCME materials that you can so that you understand what are the pathways and what are the requirements.
I think those are phenomenal comments. Thank you. And so I think, again, looking at that kind of framework from before, that's speaking about the compliance part. So again, the compliance part is a huge component of what we do. Again, it may not be what you do day to day, but it is exactly what you do once every 7 years or once every 8 years. And when that happens, boy, it becomes all you do every day for that, year and a half or 2 years. And so, so I completely agree. I think to me, that one of the important parts about a framework like that is being able to say that, yes, it does not mean you have to do one particular part of that, but get some experience in compliance, like something like whether it's on a self-study group over here, or maybe you're on the review group, or maybe it's after an LCME visit and you are responding to an issue, right? So maybe there was a citation or there was something that wasn't right. So now you're part of the response group to that. So again, some kind of experience with the LCME and compliance is really important. And I agree with you. So like from the clerkship standpoint, I think that's again, a really practical and great point. So that's about some of the management piece and what have you run of a curriculum before, like what are pieces? And so the clerkship is, I think, a standard and a great way to do that. And if there are people who have, maybe they have access to different things, like, I don't know, I do global health, I don't have access to a clerkship. Great. Do you design a curriculum? Have you put together a curriculum for that and shown how that works and been able to manage that? And so I think, yeah, having some of those things, checking off some of those boxes, basically, to be able to say, if you're looking at a curriculum dean position, you have to be able to speak to all of those different areas to be able to say, like, yes, I can manage a curriculum. I know about compliance and LCME and what that is. I know what it means to institute new things, and I know how to do research and publish on that. And I know how to continuously improve things. And here's my background in that. So I think those are great examples of how one would do all of that and be able to hopefully be successful at a job search. Yeah.
John, if I could ask, so you train in infectious disease. How much of your time do you spend in the associate dean role versus as a clinician at this point in your career?
Right. So two parts to that. The first part is sort of standardly. It's I'm officially 95% associate dean for curriculum. I do a little bit more than that. I do about 3 weeks of transplant ID attending. And then twice a month, I do an HIV clinic out of the VA where I also precept fellows.
So you're up to 130% so far.
And again, so another important life lesson, there is no role out there that is confined to the FTE allocated it, period. Just, it doesn't happen. So given my background of having been an assistant dean for students before and an associate dean for curriculum or medical education, it meant that when we lost one of our team members, when Lee Jones ran off to another institution, again, we love him. It's fantastic that he had a great opportunity, but we're missing him, of course. Interestingly, it meant that I was able to step in and be an interim associate dean for students. I needed a lot of faculty help to help me with the curriculum and help with students. But from an administrative level, being able to know what that leadership is and what that looks like meant that I was able to do something there that maybe not other people could have done or not other institutions would choose to do. These are two, as I think, as Dr. Cavazos was mentioning, the associate dean for students is a full-time job and plus, like it's at least 130, 140 plus. I know I'm preaching to the choir, Dr. Saldana, but the idea is that that really knowing what happens at a certain administrative level and being able to handle the higher things that are coming up that require dean level intervention, I think was really high on our minds as we were navigating certain situations. And so it meant that I could step in and we could entertain a different leadership structure. And I used the same framework that I was talking about before. I said, I will need resources to make this happen. Mm-hmm. I need other faculty to help with this. Mm-hmm. And so here's the faculty I want. For those faculty, so here's my leadership coming in there. For those faculty, I don't want this to be just a service role. Yes, we're going to pay them. I don't want it just to be that. I want this to be a stepping stone for each one of them mm-hmm. to try out an associate dean role so that they can then become associate deans later. And then we can go through and say, who are we selecting? Are we selecting people who reflect the face of the communities that we serve and et cetera? So, yeah.